Welcome to the Author's Edge radio show with Guy L. Freer. Now, their show airs nationwide on the My Genre Radio Network, Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. Each week on their show, they help authors create books that transform our lives and imaginations. Through radio excellence, they create a unique community resource, one that promotes, connects, and fosters a sense of well-being. Guy L. maintain a focus on sharing books, publishing, marketing, and writing solutions. They serve listeners by providing outlets for their creative skills and energies, and they help them flourish in the competitive marketplace. Their weekly show provides intros, writing spotlights, helps you in promoting your book, your writing, your publishing, your marketing tidbits, and much more.
Welcome to Author's Edge Show. Welcome, everyone, where we engage in lively conversations with both emerging and seasoned writers, as well as publishers, songwriters, illustrators, and artists to explore the art of storytelling. We are coming to you live weekly on Saturdays at 8 a.m. and Sundays at 7 a.m. on KWRH FM 92.9 and KXOK FM 102.9. You can hear the Author's Edge show streaming on KXOK.com, KWRH929.com, or any of our free apps, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and TuneIn. The Author's Edge show can also be heard Monday to Friday at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. nationwide on the My Genre Radio Network. You can also listen to any of our current or past shows on SoundCloud and YouTube by visiting our website at authorsedge.org. That's authorsedge, all one word, .org. So it's wonderful to be here again. Yay! Clap, 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 clap. And I want to welcome my co-host, award-winning mystery writer, Greg Stout.
Hi, how are you today?
Yay. We got applause.
We got applause.
And we're thrilled to be chatting with Larry Wood. Welcome, Larry.
Hello, glad to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. You sound like maybe not as good as you guys are. You sound like you're having a lot of fun.
Yeah, well.
Well, we're doing the best we can with what we got.
That's why we get the big bucks.
Yeah. But before we dive in, let me share a little bit about Larry's background. Larry Wood is a retired public school teacher and a freelance writer specializing in the history of Missouri, the Ozarks, and surrounding regions. He is the author of 27 books and over 500 magazine articles. His work has appeared in publications ranging from Reader's Digest to the Missouri Historical Review. Larry has received numerous awards from organizations such as the Ozark Writers League and the Missouri Writers Guild, and he is an honorary lifetime member of the latter group. A lifelong resident of Southwest Missouri, Larry and his wife Gigi live in Joplin. So welcome to our show, Larry. And as you started out as a public school teacher, which I went too. I was a public school teacher for 39 years. How long did you teach?
I taught for like 26 and a half. I retired under, at the time, I don't know if they still do or not. At the time, Missouri had a 25 and out law where a teacher, you could teach 25 years and retire. It's a slightly reduced benefit, but, then I was able to retire and do what I really wanted to do, which was to write,
Oh, okay. Well, no, I don't know if they have that anymore. Or
I don't know. I got a deal like that in Illinois, but it was only 10 years.
Oh, well,
wow.
Yeah. And big raises at the end just to get rid of people that had been there a long time, which I hadn't.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, they did give me a retirement bonus also.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah.
I didn't get a retirement bonus. I got a howdy doody. Goodbye, good luck, good riddance. I taught for 39 years.
Well,
I'm like you though, Guy. I don't think they do it anymore. I think they discontinued that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they probably want them back.
somebody.
Yeah.
So, at this point in time. So, how did teaching influence your writing career trajectory? I mean, how did you go from being a teacher to a writer? I mean, I'm assuming you taught history, correct?
No, I did not.
Oh, well, now
English.
you were an English teacher.
I was an English major in college. In fact, that's kind of, how I started out. I wanted to be write the great American novel like most English majors do.
Sure.
But as I went along, I discovered that I was really probably better at nonfiction. Not that I still write a little bit of fiction, but I mainly concentrate on nonfiction because that seems to be where I've had more success. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And so you started out as being an English teacher, and then you decided you wanted to go into writing.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, I was a writer even when I was teaching, just more part-time. You know, I wrote, I didn't start writing books until after I retired, but I wrote magazine articles and short stories and stuff like that from the time I was, first thing I was actually paid for, I was like in my mid-20s, 26 or 27, somewhere around there. First article I was ever paid for, it was about a personal experience, a story about my experiences as a kid delivering newspapers, you know, as a newspaper boy.
Yeah. What was the first book that you wrote?
First book I wrote was Civil War on the Lower Kansas-Missouri border. It's about the Civil War as it affected, you know, southwest Missouri, southeast Kansas, surrounding that area. Like, for instance, the Battle of Carthage. I wrote about that in the book. And the Battle of Baxter Springs, Kansas, just various things like that.
And how long ago was that?
That would have been probably 2000, which is what, 24?
Yeah,
24
yeah.
years
So you've been
ago.
at this a while.
Yeah. That book was self-published. I shopped it around, I sent it to university, you know, 2 or 3 different university presses.
Right.
Thought I had it accepted at the University of Oklahoma Press at one time, but they ended up not taking it, and I just kind of got tired of waiting, so I went ahead and self-published it, and then I have since probably about, I started to say half and half, but probably a few more of my books are traditionally published, and then less than half of them are self-published.
With university presses?
I have only just one book published with a university press, but I have several published with the History Press, which is they specialize in local and regional history. They're headquartered in Charleston, South Carolina, and I've had a couple of books published by Pelican Publishing, which is out of New Orleans, but ironically enough, the History Press recently, just a couple of years ago, acquired Pelican Publishing, so now they're both under the same umbrella now.
What first inspired you to write about Missouri?
I guess really probably my own family history. That's kind of how I got interested. I mean, you know, I was an English major, but how I got interested in history really was through doing family research, researching my own genealogy, and then it kind of spread from there to local history, and because I found myself spending a lot of time in local history libraries, you know, looking up genealogy stuff, and just kind of expanded from there. Particularly got interested in the Civil War and the guerrilla warfare in Missouri, you know, Quantrell and all those kind of people.
Yeah, he was a bad guy.
yeah.
Well,
in fact, my first traditionally published book was about Bloody Bill Anderson, who was one of Quantrell's lieutenants,
yes.
Quantrell's disciples.
Yeah, I went to school in Lawrence, Kansas as an undergrad, and they've never gotten over Quantrell, I can tell you that.
No, they've probably never forgotten.
No. They burned the town down.
Yes, yeah. That was really notorious.
What are some of the challenges you arise when writing about the local Ozark history and the local Missouri history? What are some of your challenges?
Well, probably at the time I first started writing, the main challenge was that in order to do research, you had to do a lot of traveling. You know, it wasn't like today where there's so much online, but back then I used to make trips to Columbia, you know, from Joplin to Columbia is a long way. I used to drive to Columbia and get up real early and drive to Columbia and spend the whole day researching at the Missouri Historical or State Historical Society of Missouri, and sometimes go to Jefferson City to research at the State Archives, and just so on and so forth like that. I spent a lot of time, you know, traveling, but now a lot of that I can do online.
Mm-hmm.
Just as an example, years ago when I first was doing this type of research, the only place near in the whole state of Missouri, I guess, that had all the census records for the whole United States was in Kansas City, or actually Independence, the Independence Mid-Continent Library. And so I would go up there fairly frequently. Our local library had all the Missouri census records, but did not have the ones from other states. But you had to go to Kansas City if you wanted to access census records from Tennessee or wherever, So anyway, that type of stuff is all online now.
So you're the author of 27 books. Are they all about Missouri and Ozarks? And
they're not all about Missouri, but they are pretty much all about this region. Like, for instance, I have my most recent book is called, the other thing I write about besides Civil War is mainly true crime.
Oh,
and
okay.
My most recent book is called Murder and Mayhem in Northeast Oklahoma. So,
Ooh.
it's not Missouri, but it's close to me because Joplin is just right,
Yeah.
real close to northeast Oklahoma.
Well, now Murder and Mayhem.
Yeah, and I have one called Murder and Mayhem in Missouri, and I have one called Murder and Mayhem in southeast Kansas. So, yeah, I write, it's all either about the Ozarks or the surrounding regions of the Ozarks,
My family is from Joplin, and my mother used to tell me that back in, I'll say, the 1930s, you had a lot of sort of gangsters who hung around in Joplin because it was easy to get across the state line, either into Oklahoma or Kansas without too much trouble at all. And so there was a significant portion of the population that was in fact a criminal element.
Yes, I think I think she was telling you the truth, probably. Bonnie and Clyde, for instance,
yes.
one of their most notorious incidents was they had a shootout here in Joplin, in which they killed 2 police officers, and but the reason they chose Joplin to begin with, they were hiding out, but the reason they chose Joplin is, like you said, it was close to Kansas, and Oklahoma, where you could take off and get out of the state real quick.
Yep.
How do you choose your topics for each book?
Well, sometimes one just kind of leads to another. Like, for instance, on the Murder and Mayhem series, that's a whole series that the History Press does. Murder and Mayhem in wherever, and I did the one on Murder and Mayhem in Missouri first, and then I got to thinking, well, I could do one on southeast Kansas because that's close to where I live, and then so this most recent one is just a kind of another follow up to that. So sometimes I just get ideas for one book based on something I've researched in the previous one or whatever.
And these are about real people?
Yes. Yeah,
okay, so who's your favorite gangster?
Well, the one I've written about the most is Bonnie and Clyde. Yeah, I've written several.
They're popular.
Even before I started writing books, I wrote a couple of articles about Bonnie and Clyde. One of them appeared in this now defunct magazine called Ozarks Mountaineer that was published down around Branson. Came out of Branson, and it finally ceased publication in 2012. But it was really one of my best markets. That's where I sold a lot of articles. Was the Ozarks Mountaineer.
And so Bonnie and Clyde was your favorite.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Why?
Favorite is not really. I don't know if you'd say favorite because that makes me sound like I like them. I don't really.
Well, no, favorite in that they'd be the most interesting.
Yeah, I find them interesting because, well, for one thing, here in Joplin, after they left, it's where they found all the film, the undeveloped film that they'd left behind, and all these pictures. See of Bonnie and Clyde, like Bonnie smoking a cigar or Bonnie gun at Clyde, that sort of stuff. All of those were on this undeveloped film that they left here in the apartment in Joplin after they made their getaway.
Yeah, everybody's seen those pictures, I think. I wondered where they came from.
Yeah.
I didn't think they had a publicist.
They were originally published in the Joplin Globe, and then all the other newspapers across the country picked up on them, and republished them. So, yeah, but that's prior to that, but Bonnie and Clyde really weren't well known. It was all those pictures is what made them famous.
Well, yeah. You can't go wrong with a publicist.
Right.
So what is it about the Ozarks that is there something unique about it? And I'm prefacing this by saying I read a book by Brooks Blevins about the history of the Ozarks, and
Right. Yeah, I've read that book also.
yeah, it's a pretty good one. And I'm wondering, what was it that drew you in?
Well, I don't really want to speak for Brooks Blevins but what I kind of get out of his writings, and I've read other writings by him other than just that trilogy that you're talking about, is he doesn't really think in the sense that a lot of people think that the Ozarks are unique. He thinks that the Ozarks more are a microcosm of the rest of the world rather than unique and separate from it. And I kind of tend to agree with him. For many years, yes, the Ozarks were kind of insulated and kind of, but I don't think that really applies that much anymore. There's people similar to people that live in the Ozarks everywhere else too. I don't really think we have that much of a unique culture anymore. But I guess I'm drawn to the Ozarks because that's where I lived my whole life.
Sure.
I grew up around in the Springfield area, and I've lived most of my adult life in the Joplin area. And both of my parents grew up in the Fort Leonard Wood area around in there. So we're, for going back for several generations, I've been in Southwest Missouri, basically.
Yeah. Well, somebody said between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, what you have is the Ozarks. So I think you're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're listening to Author's Edge, and we are chatting with Larry Wood about his book, Lady Rebels of the Civil War, Missouri, coming to you live weekly on Saturdays at 8 a.m. and Sundays at 7 a.m. on KWRH FM 92.9 and KXOK FM 102.9. You can hear the Author's Edge show streaming at kxok.com, kwrh929.com, or any of our free apps, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and TuneIn. The Author's Edge show can also be heard Monday to Friday at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. nationwide on My Genre Radio Network. You can also listen to any of our current or past shows on SoundCloud and YouTube, or by visiting our website at authorsedge.org. That's Author's Edge, all one word, .org. Okay, so what is your research process for regional history topics? How do you go about your research?
Well, I do a blog, a weekly blog, usually just one. I mean, I used to do it more often than weekly, but here the last few years I've just done it weekly. And a lot of times the way that I get my ideas is I go on newspapers.com, which is a subscription service. There are other newspaper databases that are free, like for instance the Chronicling America is one that's free. State Historical Society of Missouri in Columbia has one on their website has one that's free, but the subscription ones are better because they have access to more newspapers. So anyway, a lot of my ideas for my blog and kind of by extension for my books and stuff come from getting on newspapers.com and just doing a search for certain words like, murder, something like that, it's certain terms, maybe not just one word, but, a brutal murder. And then you can plug in the place, and I'll plug in Missouri, and you can plug in the years. And I usually go like from 1850 to 1950 or something like that. I'm tend to write more about older stuff. I do write occasionally about more recent stuff, but mostly it's the older kind of what I consider history stuff. Anything that happened, that I can remember, which goes back a long way now. Yeah. I don't really consider history that much if I can remember it.
Yeah, I know. I taught 20th century U.S. history, and I said it was easy because I lived through half of it.
Right. yeah. Right. That's kind of.
Hey, have you ever done a book about Jesse James?
I've not done a whole book. My Murder and Mayhem in Missouri has a chapter about his. That's the only time I've really ever written about Jesse James. Well, no, I also wrote one about the time George Shepard, who was a former, just like Jesse, he was a former Quantrell guerrilla during the Civil War. But this happened after the war, George Shepard claimed to have killed Jesse James in Galena, Kansas. And I wrote about that incident. Of course, he didn't kill
Yeah,
him.
but
So
we know that's
was,
not right. It was that
we
guy
know that's
Ford.
not true, but
Yeah.
he claimed to have done so. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you know, Jesse was in the area at the time, and I'm not convinced of what George Shepard thought he actually did kill him, because he did shoot at him, I think, you know, but he didn't kill him, you know.
It was a guy named Ford, wasn't it?
Ford's the one that actually killed him.
Yeah. I forgot his first name, but yeah.
Yeah, well, there was Bob Ford.
Bob Ford.
And I can't remember the other. There was two of them. They were brothers, and they were both kind of in on it. But I think it was Bob that was the one that actually pulled the trigger.
Shot him in the back.
Yeah. Yeah. He shot him in the back while he was hanging a picture on the wall. He was up on a chair hanging a picture on the wall, I think.
That was in a movie.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
very.
that happened
That's kind of brave, isn't it? Shooting him in the back.
Yeah, that happened. They called him the dirty little coward that shot Mr. Howard.
Right.
Yeah.
Because at the time Jesse was undercover. He was going by he was calling himself Howard. I can't remember what first name was, but he was calling himself Mr. Howard. You know.
Yeah.
And I know they made a movie about that Northfield, Minnesota raid. Did that actually happen? Do you know?
Oh yeah, that that was probably the most infamous younger James.
Yeah, they're going to hold up a bank and.
Yeah, but both of the James brothers escaped, but they basically caught all the youngers.
Yeah.
He had killed one of them, I think, and caught the other couple, and I don't know. And of course, that's when Cole Younger got captured, and he spent like 20 years or so in jail, and they finally released him.
Right, and then he and somebody else went around on a kind of a speaking tour, didn't they? Made a little money out of it.
He and Frank
James,
yeah. They went around. It didn't go real well though, but they did do that brief. They did it briefly, but it didn't last very long because it really didn't go over very well. I guess I can't remember whether it was back east, but it did not. Yeah, it didn't go over very well back east. You know, it went over fairly well here around in Missouri. You know, locally. But
do you have a favorite historical figure, Missourian?
No, I'm trying to think of someone other than criminals.
Well, you know, they're popular.
Yeah, that, like I say, mostly I write about criminals, but as far as enjoying writing about, I enjoyed writing about Bloody Bill Anderson. And I mean, that's he's definitely not someone you would want to say that is a person to emulate or anything like that, but I enjoyed writing about him. He was a fascinating figure. You know, he was, I guess criminally insane or something. I don't know. I mean, he was just, he had a lot that drove him crazy though. His mother got killed by lightning in 1860, and he had a brother just a couple years younger than him that either got killed or disappeared from home and was never heard from again. And then his father got shot by a union judge that was supposed to be a friend of the Anderson family, but they kind of had a falling out. And then during the war, that was all just right before the war started. And during the war, one of his sisters got killed in the collapse of the Union prison. So, he had a lot of tragedy in his life that kind of drove him mad, but still, that's no excuse for, some of the stuff he did.
Yeah. So he didn't make lemonade out of lemons, did he?
No.
Well, we're going to have to go to a break in a couple of minutes. And before we do that, though, I do want to make I do want to talk about Greg for a couple of seconds here. I'm thrilled to take that moment to spotlight our incredible co-host, a true master of the mystery genre and an award-winning writer. He's not just any author, he's a Shamus Award winner, a prestigious honor given by the Private Eye Writers of America to celebrate excellence in private eye fiction. He's graced our show a few times, and fans of detective fiction might know him best for his gripping Jackson Gable series. His latest novel, Long Time Gone, is another thrilling addition that keeps readers on the edge of their seats.
It does. It does. And it should be out in the next, I'll say, week or so.
Oh, great. Wonderful. And then, are you an author, publisher, editor, illustrator, songwriter, or artist looking to expand your reach. Advertise on Author's Edge to connect with passionate readers and industry insiders. With engaging interviews, reviews, and discussions, your book will shine. Why choose us? Reach thousands of book lovers, boost sales and visibility, target impactful ads, trust host endorsements. Elevate your presence with Author's Edge. Contact us today at 573-714-1352, where authors and readers meet. And we're going to go to commercial break for a moment, and we'll be right back, Larry, to chat with you some more.
Okay.
El Potro Restaurant and Market, located at 6920 Manchester Avenue, 1 block east of McCausland, offers the finest variety of Mexican and Central American groceries and goods. El Potro Restaurant serves authentic Mexican and Central American cuisine, including daily specials, not to mention the best horchata and tastiest margaritas in St. Louis. Open 7 days a week. El Potro, 6920 Manchester Avenue, 1 block east of McCausland.
The United States has a strong tradition of welcoming newcomers and refugees. The Welcome Corps is a new service opportunity for Americans inspired to welcome those seeking freedom and safety and in turn help strengthen their own communities. Welcome Corps is a public-private partnership that is inspired by what Americans represent to so many around the world, a beacon of hope and refuge. All it takes is a helping hand. Are you ready to learn more? Contact the International Institute of St. Louis at info@iistl.org or call 314-773-9090. That's info@iistl.org or call 314-773-9090. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision was a major legal event and catalyst that contributed to the Civil War. The decision declared that Dred Scott could not be free because he was not a citizen. The 14th Amendment, also called the Dred Scott Amendment, granted citizenship to all born or naturalized here in our country and was intended to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court decision on July 9, 1868. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation is requesting a commemorative stamp to be issued from the U.S. Postal Service to recognize and remember the heritage of this amendment by issuing a stamp with the likeness of the man Dred Scott. But we need your support and the support of thousands of people who would like to see this happen. To achieve this goal, we ask you to download, sign, and share the one-page petition with others. To find the petition, please go to dredscottlives.org and click on the Dred Scott Petition Drive on the right side of the page.
Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and we are talking with Larry Wood. So, Larry, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, terrific. So let's talk about your book, Lady Rebels of the Civil War, Missouri.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
you gave us a quote. I'd like to share that with our audience. War has traditionally been considered the domain of men, and women were expected to play little, if any, direct role. However, this conception was challenged by the realities of the Civil War, during which women served both the Union and Confederate armies as nurses, cooks, laundress, seamstress, and sutlers. Some even disguised themselves as men and fought as soldiers. In border states like Missouri that were occupied by the Union, many Southern women served as spies, smugglers, or mail carriers. Lady Rebels of Civil War, Missouri chronicles the stories of some of these women. So is Lady Rebels of Civil War, Missouri the first book you've written about? No, that's a done deal because you already told us that you've written more than that about Missouri and the Civil War. But tell us a little bit about the book.
Okay. Well, yeah, I did answer Greg's question when he asked if,
Right.
My first book was about the lower Kansas, Missouri. But I did want to mention that this is not the first book I've written about women in Missouri getting in trouble with the Union. I also wrote one called Bushwhacker Bells, which is kind of a sequel, or not a sequel, a prequel, I guess, to the one, a prequel to the Lady Rebels of Civil War, Missouri. The difference was that Bushwhacker Bells focused almost exclusively on the sisters and girlfriends of the Missouri guerrillas, the ones that were out in the bush, and it was mainly women who got in trouble for sheltering guerrillas, or giving them a place to stay or giving them food, that sort of thing. Whereas this book that I'm talking about today, Lady Rebels of Civil War Missouri, focuses more on women who got in trouble for things like spying or delivering, running Confederate mail, delivering mail, or distributing mail. Women who got in trouble for smuggling stuff into prisoners, to Confederate prisoners, that sort of thing. And most of those activities took place around St. Louis, in and around St. Louis, whereas the previous book was more scattered throughout the whole state. So this book focuses a little bit more just on the St. Louis area.
Larry, what's a sutler?
Sutler is basically someone that kind of follows the army around and sells stuff to them.
But not like a camp follower. That's a little different, right?
No, a camp follower kind of had the implication of
Right,
a lady of ill repute or something, But no, sutlers were people that, and they were male as well as female. A sutler was just someone that like I say, followed them around and sold goods to them, not goods. I start saying goods and services, but not just goods mainly,
Something like profiteering.
Right. Yeah. That sort of thing. And then, like I said, you also had your women that did laundry for them, and of course, some women served as nurses, that sort of thing.
Okay, so these lady rebels were more or less engaged in, what should we call them, legitimate activities, or at least acceptable activities? Sounds like.
Well, I'm talking more about the ones that were engaged in illegal or illegitimate activities.
Okay.
I don't write a lot about the nurses and so forth, the ones that were engaged in illegitimate activities. I'm talking about the ones. See, Missouri, of course, was a very divided state during the Civil War. It remained in the Union, but there was a strong Confederate sentiment throughout the state, especially in the rural areas, but even in St. Louis and throughout the whole rest of the state. There were a lot of Confederate sympathizers, and consequently, there was kind of a whole spy network that developed among, and it was a lot, especially women, because most of the men were already, were away at war or whatever.
Sure.
So,
and, some of these women, like I say, they got in trouble for there were several prisons in St. Louis during the Civil War, Union prisons where they housed Confederate prisoners, and women would visit the prisoners, and sometimes they would smuggle in contraband to them or whatever, or deliver mail to them, which was a no-no, not supposed to do that, and just various things like that.
So were they women that had regular jobs, like they were a nurse, and then they would do spying at the same time? Is that what they would do? Or are they that they would just be spies and they didn't have regular jobs?
Well,
or was it a combination?
Strangely enough, Gael, a lot of the women in this book were teachers. They were school teachers,
Well, that's interesting.
They tended to be single women. They weren't always. Some of them were married too. In fact, there was one case of a woman who was a very strong Confederate sympathizer, but she was married to a man who was strictly a Union guy. But anyway,
mixed marriage.
A lot of the women,
mixed marriage.
But several of the women in here were school teachers, and that kind of hints at one of the characteristics of these women. A lot of them were fairly well educated, came from well-to-do backgrounds or at least respectable backgrounds anyway. So, they weren't just criminal types,
Mm-hmm.
but they got in the civil. Pardon me. Go ahead.
No. I was just thinking that if they were like doing like a legitimate job, like they were a nurse or they were a laundress or a cook, and they were doing this as they were doing their jobs. That was what I was thinking.
I'm sure that did take place a lot, but I did not. Most of the women I write about, that was not the case with them. Now, they did usually have a legitimate pass to go to the prisons or to visit the prisons or whatever, but they, of course, didn't have a legitimate pass to be smuggling stuff in and out or whatever. That sort of thing.
Yeah, so they would maybe bake a hacksaw into a cake.
Right. They could. Yeah. That fact. the one I was telling you about, who was married to the Union guy, that was one of the things she got in deep trouble for, was helping a prisoner escape.
Okay, so what happened to them if they got caught? Did they stand them up in front of a wall and shoot them?
That's a good question, Greg, because it varied a lot. And one of the reasons it varied was it depended partly on when it happened. Early in the war, the Union's authorities tended to be a lot easier on the women because they did not want to be seen as making war against women. Especially younger women, making war against mere girls. So a lot of times they would just maybe give them a warning and that'd be about it, or maybe perhaps make them take a oath of allegiance, require them to take an oath of allegiance. But then later on, they realized how serious, the women, how much they were contributing to the cause and how serious a problem it was. And they started being the punishment started being greater. Like, for instance, they started banning them from the state, exiling them from the state, either sending them south or sending them to Illinois or some northern state completely away from Missouri, or they'd put them in prison. Like I say, there were several prisons in St. Louis, and 2 or 3 of them were actually designated as women's prisons. One of them was the Gratiot Street Prison, or Gratiot Street, how you pronounce that?
Gratiot.
Street, Gratiot Street Prison. And then there was a St. Charles Street Prison. I don't know, at least one other. I can't think right off the hand. But then, of course, the extreme cases, there was about 3 cases, women were actually sentenced to death.
Wow.
Never carried out. Either Abraham Lincoln intervened and countermanded the order or whatever, but it did. There were 3 women that I know of that got sentenced to be hanged.
Did this same kind of thing go on the Union side? Do you know?
Not in Missouri. I mean, of course, but maybe there were, like, for instance, in northern Arkansas. Arkansas was a kind of a flip-flop. Arkansas was a Confederate state, but in the northern part of Arkansas, there were a lot of Union sympathizers. So, yeah, it kind of was a reverse situation there, but I don't know as much about Arkansas as I do about Missouri.
That could be your next topic.
Maybe so. Yeah.
Can you tell us about 1 or 2 specific women that you chronicle in the Lady Rebels?
Well, one interesting case is Missouri Wood, and no relation to me, but her first name was Missouri and last name Wood. That was her married name. She was married to a guy named Wood, and she was very well-to-do. She got in trouble she had a friend who this happened in like February of 1864 is when she got in trouble. And the previous summer of 1863, she had this friend who went south. There were some people banished to the south, and this friend of hers voluntarily went with the banished people. And when they did that, when they agreed to be banished, they had to abide by the same terms that the ones who were banished had to abide by. But she sneaked back into St. Louis without permission, and of course that was illegal, and visited some people and so forth. And then Missouri Wood helped her get back out of St. Louis without being detected, and that's what she got in trouble for. But anyway, she came under suspicion, and they questioned her, and she denied even knowing the woman that she supposedly helped,
Mm-hmm.
and she just denied everything. So they turned her loose temporarily. But this woman that she helped had 3 sisters, all of whom lived in St. Louis, and all of whom were Union sympathizers. Even though this one woman was a Confederate sympathizer, her sisters were all Union sympathizers, and they identified Missouri Wood as the woman that helped their sister escape. So they went back to arrest Missouri Wood, but in the meantime, she had like $5,000-6,000 on her person in her possession.
Wow,
that's a lot.
That's a bunch of money.
Yeah. That was a bunch of money back then.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of money now. Are you kidding?
Right. She had all this money, and she knew that they were going to come to arrest her. She thought they probably might come back, so she was going to put it in the bank to, for safekeeping. And she had gotten ready and was just starting to go to the bank on a Monday morning to deposit the money, and they came to arrest her. And she actually had the money with her when they arrested her. So they took her to jail, took her to the St. Charles Street prison, and St. Charles Street prison had a reputation as being unsanitary, and they mistreated the prisoner, and it's just a bad place all the way around. And the prison warden, I guess you'd call him, was kind of crooked. And anyway, he knew that Missouri Wood was well off. He didn't know she had the money with her, but he knew she was well off. He knew her husband was very well off.
So let me guess.
He kind of bribed her. He kind of said that he would get her out if she would give him money. Well, she had the money on her person, and she didn't give it to him right then. But later on, she gave him like $4,000 to get him out, to get her out. And he came back to her and said he wasn't able to, but if you could come up with another $1,000, I'll find a more. He was going to see what he could do with the authorities. And he said, well, I couldn't do anything, but I'll find a more direct way to help you if you can come up with another $1,000. And so she gave him another $1,000, and he actually left a key for her to get out. And so basically she bought her way out of prison.
Yeah, that would be about 5 years earnings for an ordinary person back then, maybe even more than that.
Right. That was a lot of money.
Yeah,
and
it was.
Her husband was a salesman, or he would make regular trips. The reason he was not home when it happened is he made regular trips. He left her all this money while he went to New Orleans on a business trip. But anyway, so she basically bought her way out, sneaked out, and headed for Canada. And she got up. She made it all the way to Canada without being caught, without being detected. And finally, while she was in Canada, she wrote a letter back to her sister in St. Louis, and the letter got intercepted. So they found out where she was, but they still couldn't go get her. But they wrote to her and asked her if she would talk about how she got out, and so she told about how the prison warden guy was basically a crook and everything, and they arrested him, but they finally never did charge him or prosecute him. But anyway, that was an interesting case. And
how do you dig all this up?
Yeah, how do you?
Because this is not common knowledge. I mean, everybody knows who Jesse James is. How do you dig this up?
Well, again, Greg, a lot of this did not used to be online.
Right.
The Missouri State Archives in Jefferson City had what they called the Union Provost papers, and the Union Provost Marshals were, of course, the when you had martial law, they were the law in the state of Missouri because Missouri was under martial law throughout the whole Civil War. But anyway, these Provost Marshal papers were only available at Jefferson City, and I used to go up there a lot. But now they have this place called Fold 3, FOLD, and then the numeral 3. And it's a subscription thing, but for $7 a month or something, you can subscribe to Fold 3, and they have all of these records online that you can access, and it has all these cases where people got arrested for this and that, for murder or whatever they got arrested for. Anything from violating your oath of office all the way up to murder or something. So anyway, but when Missouri Wood escaped, she took this 17 years. Missouri was like in her early to mid 30s, 33 years old or so. So she was kind of more typical of the women I wrote about in Lady Rebels. Most of them were, in their mid to late 20s, around in there. Now, the Bushwhacker Bells book, those girls that helped the guerrillas, they tend to be a lot younger. Most of them even in their teens, 16, 17, 18 years old. Whereas and I don't think they were really as dedicated to the Confederate cause. They were more just helping their brothers,
boyfriends,
and so forth. Whereas the women in St. Louis, they were more actually agents of the Confederacy. But anyway, Missouri Wood, when she escaped, she took this 17-year-old girl, Emily Weaver, with her. And Emily was one, I mentioned a while ago that there were several women who had been convicted of spying. That's what, in her case, in Emily Weaver's case, it was spying, and she was sentenced to death. And so she escaped while she was under a sentence of death and made it back to Arkansas, I think. She was from Batesville, Arkansas. She had come up from Batesville to St. Louis with some other people and had gone to Rolla and looked over the fortifications in Rolla and so forth. And supposedly she was accused anyway of spying for General Shelby, Confederate General Shelby, because he had just recently occupied Batesville right before she left Batesville, you know. But anyway, they finally ended up countermanding the order that she be executed. The general did. He instead of executing her, he just banished her.
Wow.
But the court martial found her guilty and sentenced her to death. But then the general in charge said no. That because the reason that he did was because the only real evidence against her was a jailhouse snitch. There wasn't any. It was just this.
Yeah, we know about those.
Yeah.
Told on her. You know.
What would public sentiment toward these women have been during the time? Would they have been, you know, heroines, or would they have been scalawags?
Well, it depends on which side.
I guess it
you were
depends on
talking
which
to.
side you're on. Yeah.
The newspapers, which were all, you know, the Union, because or either some of them more strongly so than others, but the newspapers that were really Confederate in sympathy were squashed very early in the war. You know, they were no longer publishing after a year or so into the war. But like the St. Louis, Missouri Democrat, Daily Missouri Democrat was publishing throughout the war. The St. Louis, Missouri Republican was publishing throughout the war. Republican was a little more conservative than the Democrat. It was more, I mean, it still was very much Union, but it wasn't quite as radical Union as the Democrat. But anyway, according to those newspapers, these women were just, you know, basically prostitutes almost or something. You know, they were just really, really bad women. But as far as the Confederates were concerned, they probably kind of looked at them as heroines, you know.
Yeah.
What happened to these women after the war?
Most, you know, I kind of believe, and this is kind of a prominent theory that has been advanced in recent years. For years, the women, like I say, they weren't even expected to take part in war, and historians just kind of treated them as an afterthought. Didn't, you know, just as a footnote. They didn't, if they were mentioned at all, they were usually mentioned as victims, and that was about it. And it's only been in the last 50 years at the most that women began to be re-examined by scholars and historians, and the contributions that they actually made, and they were actually empowered by it, because, like, for instance, just taking an oath of allegiance was a recognition that this was a real person separate from her husband, you know, or separate from her father or whatever, you know. It kind of was a recognition of her individuality or her personhood. So they were kind of empowered by it. But yet, when the war ended, they kind of went back to the traditional role of women, supporting their men, and kind of bought into the you know, myth of the lost cause, that the Confederate cause was just and everything, and that it was you know, fighting against the oppressive federal government, and the women were helpmates supporting their heroic men, that sort of thing. So they kind of went back into more traditional roles. The Civil War forced them out of their traditional roles, but they willingly kind of readopted those roles, most of them. And, you know, they got married, and most of them got married and lived relatively normal lives.
So you don't think the Civil War really did much to change their roles or their perspectives?
Not in the long haul. I think it did temporarily. I think, like I said, I think it kind of empowered them and forced men, the Union authorities in particular, to take them seriously, you know, if nothing else. that's part of the thing, I mentioned a while ago, that early in the war, they were treated kind of with kid gloves because they weren't really taken seriously.
Sure.
Right.
But,
But towards the end of the war, they were taken a little bit more seriously, and so they were punished a little bit more seriously.
there you go. Yeah.
And then after the war, they were not taken seriously anymore. They were sent back to the kitchen.
That's kind of what it was. Yeah. So I don't know that it had any long-term effect as far as how they were seen or how they were treated, but maybe it did. Because
Yeah.
change is gradual. And I think.
Yeah, we just have a minute or two. I wanted to ask you, because I know you're part of the board of directors of the Missouri Writers Guild. What benefit do you find in being a part of this group? Because I know we have a lot of people who listen and they think, geez, I'd like to write a book, but I'm wondering if they have an idea how to go about it.
Well, I've been a member of the Missouri Writers Guild for almost 50 years, not quite 50 years, 76, 77, somewhere around there. It was when I first joined. And one of the main things that I always liked about it was they always sponsored annual contest for stuff that was published during the previous year. And they used to have a lot more categories even than they do now. I think now we have like 9 categories usually, and sometimes in the past we've had up to as many as 20 or so different categories. And so I always enjoyed entering those contests and just, kind of a verification or confirmation that what you wrote was worthwhile. Even if you just get an honorable mention or something, it's somebody else is at least saying that what you wrote was halfway decent or whatever. I think that's a good way for beginning writers to kind of get their foot in the door, or to at least get some experiences to enter contests. But as far as other benefits, it's just kind of the camaraderie of being around other people that do the same thing you do. You share some of the same interests with, and so forth.
Sure.
I'm also on the board. In fact, I'm the incoming president of Ozark Writers League, which is a group that meets in Branson, or has traditionally always met in Branson. I'm thinking about moving them to Joplin this year. Anyway, so yeah, I've been involved in those two groups for a long time, especially the Missouri Writers Guild.
What is your writing routine?
Well, when I was teaching school, it mainly was I'd try to work in an hour or so right after I got home from school, something like that. And I rarely wrote more than maybe a couple hours at the most, because I just didn't have time with all the other stuff. Since I've retired, I have more time, but I still don't always write. I really don't have a strict routine, Gael, as far as writing at the same time every day. Some people get up at 6 o'clock and start writing, and they write from 6 o'clock till noon or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I just whenever I get up, that's when I get up, and when I usually go to the computer and may write a couple hours, and then take a big long lunch hour, and may come back and write an hour. But I don't have a strict routine. But what I would say is, I think you have to have some kind of I don't know, maybe you wouldn't call it a routine, but something that shows that you're dedicated to being a writer. You can't just, do it for a couple weeks and then for a couple of weeks and then lay off and not do it for 6 months.
Yeah, it takes discipline.
It does.
You got to have some kind of discipline. To me, it's just, I don't really feel like it's been a complete day if I haven't done something, toward my writing. It may be something as simple as going back and editing something I wrote the day before, or whatever.
Right.
I know some days I'm lucky if I can squeeze out 2 sentences.
Right.
Because you want to get it right. You want to get it right.
What was it Hemingway say? One true sentence?
Yeah.
What regional story surprised you during your research?
What regional story?
Mm-hmm. That you wrote? What regional story that you were researching surprised you during your research?
Surprised me. Well, I'm starting a new book right now. I'm thinking, if I do write, go ahead and finish it. I just started the first couple chapters It's going to be called Murderous Women of Missouri.
Uh-huh.
Oh, Murderous Women of Missouri.
Yeah.
Oh, my studio
and-
manager here is pointing fingers at me.
And the
I could see you.
first chapter.
Just don't get me cranked up.
The first chapter is tentatively going to be about this woman.
About crazy French women?
Woman right after the Civil War in St. Louis, like 1867. She lived in a house of ill repute, and one of her customers got mad at her, and they had a big argument. And she ended up throwing a poker at her. You know, the kind you used to use to poke your wood to stir up your fire.
Uh-huh.
And the sharp point of it stuck him in the head, and he didn't think it. He just pulled it out himself. He didn't think it hurt that bad, but he ended up he ended up dying from it. He was mortally wounded. You know, he ended up dying a week or so later. So that kind of surprised me because, you know, throwing that poker and it stuck him in the head, and I don't know. And so anyway, I'm going to call it "You Poke Me and I'll Poke You."
That sounds good.
Well, it could be something else.
Okay. What advice would you give beginning writers? We got 4 minutes.
Okay, 4 minutes. Well, the main thing is, like we were talking about, you've got to have some kind of, it may not be actually a routine, but you got to have some kind of dedication to it. You know, you can't just look at it as something that you're going to do part of the time and maybe not do part of the time, that sort of thing. You got to actually be dedicated to it. Another thing I would say is don't give up. You know, I've had so many, you know, rejections to articles, and then sometimes I end up selling them after the 8th or 10th time that I send them out or whatever. So, yeah, that would be another important thing I would say. And I've also kind of mentioned a couple other things. I think it's important that you join a writers group or join a critique group or something. Surround yourself with other writers, people who, you know, do the same, have the same interest you do. And another thing I've mentioned is, you know, practice. You know, do something. You know, enter some contests. You know, they say that the first million words are just practice. You know, so you gotta really write. You know.
How can our audience get in touch with you?
Well, I have a author Facebook page. You know, on Facebook, you can just, you know, Google, or not Google, but search author Larry Wood on Facebook. I also have a blog, the history blog that I mentioned. It's called Ozarks-History.
Ozark-History.
Ozarks with an S on the end. Ozarks-History.
Okay.
.blogspot.com.
Oh, there's more?
Or again, you can just Google Larry Wood Ozarks History. And
okay, Larry Wood. Okay. And your books can be purchased on Amazon?
They're all available on Amazon. Some of them are available in stores, but you know, it just depends. That's just kind of a hit and miss thing. But they're all available on Amazon and you know, Barnes and Noble, that sort of place.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on Author's Edge, Larry Wood. Tune in again next week for our more tips, resources, and your favorite conversations. Our next guest will be Easy Grace, and we'll be chatting with her about her latest book, The A to Z Adulting Guide, and how to navigate adulthood like a boss. Till then, we'll see you around the inkwell.
Okay. Thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Greg. You know, I mentioned I'm the incoming president for Ozark Writers League. Are you there, Greg?
Greg?
Yeah, Greg's here.
Yes.
I mentioned I'm the incoming president for Ozark Writers League.
Uh-huh.
I thought of you as maybe a possible speaker one at some of these times for our group. Of course, it'd be a long way for you to have to come, but anyway, I'll email you about it.
Yeah, do that. Yeah, I'd depending on, well, and if it's not, in the middle of the winter or something, we can do that, sure.
Yeah, well, we would pay you mileage. and
This
so
would be
forth,
in
but anyway,
Joplin?
That's what I'm thinking right now. But it either be Joplin or Branson. In either case, you'd have to come quite a ways. Probably.
Well, I got
Yeah.
a cousin in Joplin. I can torture her anyway with my presence.
Okay, well,
All right.
I'll look at that.
Yeah, let me know. Let me know.
All right.
Okay?
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Larry, I will send